Okay, so in this video we're going to attempt to create a basic shades and shadowing exercise on two very simple shapes, which are a cube and a cylinder. So before we get started, the first things you will need to complete the task would be a selection of 3 or 4 pencils. So the pencils you would probably need would be a H pencil, a HB pencil, a 3B pencil and a 2B pencil, and also maybe a blue colouring pencil just to start off the outlines of the different objects, which will then be heavied in using a heavier pencil, maybe a 2B or a 3B pencil. So in shading and shadowing, it's basically a shading exercise using the different pencils, and you're basically heavying in or using a darker pencil to shade in where the shadow forms on the object. So as you can see in this particular example, we have 2 red arrows indicating the direction of sunlight on the objects. That in turn forms a shadow on the back of the object. So we have the shadow of the cube forming on the cylinder, and we have the shadow of the cylinder forming on the ground that it's sitting on. So that's basically the ins and outs of it. So we're just going to attempt now to recreate this particular exercise using 2 identical shapes as seen here. So again, we have 2 very simple shapes, a cylinder and a cube, and we have our direction of sunlight indicated by our 2 red arrows. So the first thing to do would be to just carry out a basic light shade across the whole area of where the objects are, include where the objects are sitting and where the objects are. So that will be done using a very light pencil, such as a H pencil. Very, very lightly. This is in no way a technical process or a So once you have that done, the next step would be just to maybe smudge the shaded areas, or to make them look more realistic. So that's done quite simply just by using your finger to rub across the area, quite simply like this, as I'm doing. Something like that. So the next step then would be to basically, we want to form the shape of the cube on the cylinder. So where the shadow is formed in the cylinder and on the surrounding areas around the cube, indicated by our direction of sunlight. So from our previous example, we can see that the direction of sunlight is indicated by the arrows, as it is in this situation, and we can then develop our shaded area or our shadow area based on that. So the shadow is going to be to the back of the object in both cases, because the sunlight is coming in the same direction for both. So the first thing I would do is outline, just roughly outline where the shadows will form. So that's just something simply like that. The shadow is going to form something like that on the object, both on the ground and on the cylinder behind. So I would then, with a heavy pencil, I'm using a 2B pencil here. You could use a 2B or a 3B pencil just to heavy in the area to form to show the formation of the shadow. And like before, we can just smudge it ever so slightly using our finger, just to make it more realistic looking. So now we may need to come back to this later on in the video just to heavy it in even more. So our next task then is to form the shadow of the cylinder. So this again is just done by eye. It's not a very technical process in any way, it's just done by eye for the most part. So as we can see, our direction of sunlight is coming in the arrow, so our shadow formation is going to be towards the back of the cylinder in the same direction as the cube. So it's going to look something like that, and just heavy it in then with your 2B or 3B pencil. Again, I'm using a 2B pencil, but I may need to come back to this later on with a heavier 3B pencil just to darken it even more. And again, just to make it look more like an actual realistic shadow, I will smudge it ever so slightly with my finger. Now already we can start to see the formation of the shadows on our two simple objects. So I will now go with a heavier pencil. I will go with a 3B pencil just to make the shadows darker and more, as I was saying, more realistic. So again, just, and a blunt pencil, a blunt heavy pencil like the one I'm using here, a blunt 3B pencil is best, because sometimes a sharp pencil can leave a kind of more stroke marks on the shadowed area, which we don't really want to see any pencil marks as such. We just want to see the dull shadow left from the pencil. So as you can see there now, there are stroke marks from the pencil, but I will be able to eliminate those by just smudging them as before. And it also brings in just the ever so slight shadow towards this side of the cube, the left side of the cube, and towards just the top corner, which makes it also look more realistic, as if it were in a real life situation. And again, I will now do the same on the cylinder. Just heavy it in ever so slightly more, just make it look slightly more realistic. Now again, the blunter the pencil here, the better for this job. And just by smudging down with your finger, you can eliminate the stroke marks left by the point of the pencil. So now, that's basically the shadowing exercise now, but just to incorporate more shading now into the sketch, I'll just use a very light pencil. So I'm just going to use a HB pencil just to shadow as if just to shade basically where the objects are sitting. So it makes it look like the objects are actually sitting on a table or a desk or on the ground or something. They're not floating in mid-air. So that's just done, again, not very technical or anything, but just done by eye. Just give the objects themselves another slight little heavy in, just to make them stand out a little bit. And we can once again just carry out the smudging, just to get rid of those stroke marks from the actual pencil. Because in a real life situation, you never see a stroke mark left on the shade of a car on the ground, or the shade of your body on the ground if the sun is shining on you. So it should be important to have it as realistic as possible. So that's basically the shades and shadowing exercise. So to just have a recap on what we done. So the first thing we done was we started off with our objects. So I didn't actually draw the objects in this particular video because it was a solely just a video on shades and shadowing. But when drawing the objects or sketching the objects, I first of all use the blue pencil, so the blue colouring pencil, just to roughly give me the outline of my objects, something like so when I was doing them. And I then heavy in the objects, the outline of the objects, using a heavy pencil such as a 2B or 3B pencil. So the 3B pencil here or the 2B pencil. Then I established my direction of sunlight. So that was, I had that indicated already by the red arrows here on the actual sketch, and that determined then the formation of my shadows on the objects. So the shadow of the cube formed on some of the table and also on the actual cylinder itself, because the cylinder was sitting behind the cube, and the shadow then of the cylinder just formed on the table or the ground towards the back of the cylinder. So once I had that established, I could then start my shading exercise. So the shading exercise was done first of all with a light 2B pencil, or sorry, a heavy 2B pencil but lighter than the 3B. So I began the shading exercise like so and like so, and then just carried out some very slight smudging just to make it look more realistic. And then I came along with my 3B pencil and I just heavied in the shadows even more, like so and like so, and I carried out slight smudging again just to make it more realistic and to make it look more dull. And once that was completed, then the last thing to do was to just very lightly give a light shade around the objects, and actually on the objects also, just to make it look like the objects were sitting on a table or on the floor or desk or whatever. And again, just some slight smudging just to make it duller, to make it look more realistic, as if the sun was shining on it. One thing I didn't actually mention, and that would be important from time to time, would be the use of a rubber. So a rubber could be used, or an eraser, just to clean up the areas if the smudging was a little bit overdone or whatever. But in this situation now it looks rather okay, so I won't use a rubber eraser to rub out any shades or any shadows or lines or anything. So that's basically the task done. So another recap. So what you should be able to do after doing this video is you should be able to determine, number one, the shadows of an object based on sunlight projection, or an arrow of sunlight projection as done here. You should also be able to carry out the shading of the actual shadows using different grade pencils. So in this situation it was a 2B and a 3B pencil. You should also be able to smudge to make an object or a shadow on an object look more realistic, as if it was in a real life sense. And once again, you should also know how to do just very basic shading around the objects and on the objects to make them just stand out that little bit more. So that's it for this video. I hope you learned lots about shading and shadowing, and also about different types of pencils you can use when shading and shadowing, and also when sketching in general. The methods used here in this video are quite common methods, and they can be quite effective. So that's it, and thanks for watching.